Wedding week illusion. Over 2 weeks before their son's wedding, John received a surprising phone call from Angela, his ex-wife. Their recent interactions had been cordial, even pleasant. John had put in great effort to foster a civil dynamic with Angela, her new partner, and the extended families, believing they had arrived at a mutual understanding for the sake of their children and grandchildren. Angela explained that the wedding's eve celebration was being held in her backyard, and casually mentioned that help was needed gathering liquor and preparing the space. Always willing to contribute, John offered a generous donation. He had recently won a large basket of cheer at his lodge's annual fundraiser. In good faith, 2 weekends before he delivered the assortment of liquors and arranged them neatly in a designated bar area in the kitchen, which was outfitted with a wine fridge. He also brought several cases of beer, carefully stacking them into the refrigerator in the garage. He even offered to help with setting up tables, stringing lights across the patio, and coordinating the flow of traffic for guests. Wanting to be involved. At this point, John had no reason to suspect that anything was amiss. The COVID lockdowns were long over, and he was unaware that subtle shifts in family dynamics, particularly with his children, the narcissism had already begun to take root. Small exclusions had been building over time, disguised as logistics or misunderstandings. But this event would crystallize a truth he had long tried to deny. John returned to Angela's home, anticipating a joyful evening. But what he found was unsettling. His donation of liquor was nowhere to be found. The bar area he had stocked was barren of his offerings, and the coolers around the expansive backyard, complete with large pool, jacuzzi, and sprawling patio, were filled with a different selection of drinks. Other beer brands, wine coolers, and an array of sodas. When John inquired, he was casually told that his son had chosen to supply all the refreshments himself as a personal gesture for the celebration, an event traditionally hosted by the groom's parents. As John tried to process the subtle exclusion, things became more awkward. Before the arrival of the bride's family, his son began issuing directives to John, guidelines that were delivered with a firm, almost protective tone, particularly where his mother Angela was concerned. It felt less like collaboration and more like choreography. When the bride's family arrived, they brought with them 2 beautifully crafted charcuterie boards, lavishly prepared and presented on ornate, collectible wooden trays. Angela, standing beside John, commented on how thoughtful the gesture was and took time to describe the high-end culinary source that had prepared them. The message was clear. This family brought class, contribution, and consideration. Moments later, while the gathering was still small, Angela raised a glass and offered a toast. She claimed she was too bashful to speak publicly at the actual wedding reception and chose this more intimate setting instead. Her toast, composed and heartfelt, touched on themes of love, growth, and the beauty of watching children build their own lives. John, genuinely moved, realized that some of her sentiments echoed his own. He quietly reviewed the notes she prepared for the reception speech and thought to incorporate a few of her thoughtful phrases into his own remarks. But before he could say a word, his son abruptly cut him off in front of the group. "Dad's not giving a speech at the reception," he announced, blaming the decision on the bride's preference. John stood there in stunned silence. It wasn't just exclusion. It was a humiliation, delivered so matter-of-factly and without room for discussion. His hands, which once held his children with comfort and protection, now seemed tied behind his back by the manipulation of perception. Later, while walking past a small grouping, John overheard his son speaking to the bride's father. "My dad always embarrassed my mom when he spoke at events like this," he said with a dismissive chuckle. This said immediately following the future father-in-law, inquiring why John could not offer a toast. In truth, John had only ever spoken publicly twice in the past 37 years, once at his daughter's graduation dinner and once at her wedding. At the wedding, he offered nothing more than heartfelt well wishes from both parents. Angela, notably, refused to speak. At the graduation party, John told 2 gentle, self-deprecating jokes, both of which had been rehearsed and approved by Angela and her then-boyfriend, Jeb, who has since passed away. Yet here he was, cast as an unreliable presence and a social liability. The pain wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. This was a culmination of years of slowly shifting loyalties and meticulously managed narratives. John's experience at the wedding would eventually warrant an entire chapter of its own. But this moment, the wedding's eve, was where the final mask began to slip. Angela's actions represent a profound erosion of not just parental respect, but identity itself. She had capitalized on 2 key dynamics: the post-COVID social reset and John's physical distance after moving to a retirement community several states away. With these, she re-scripted the family narrative, removing John not just from logistics, but from legacy. Her manipulations were not overt acts of aggression. They were strategic omissions, subtle redirections, and carefully orchestrated optics that gradually chipped away at John's role as a father and co-parent. By fostering dependency and emotional loyalty among the children, and by cultivating an idealized image of herself, she effectively rewrote the family script. In doing so, Angela not only alienated John from pivotal family milestone, she also sabotaged a very co-parenting and co-grandparenting relationship he had worked so diligently to maintain. She reframed distance as disinterest and restraint as incompetence. What should have been a celebration of unity and growth became, for John, a masterclass in exclusion by manipulation. It was not an oversight. It was a carefully arranged illusion, crafted to uphold her image while quietly discarding his. And it worked. Perfectly. Another flawless stroke in the greater portrait of a sleight of mind. John began the morning of his son's wedding with quiet anticipation, sharing a modest breakfast with a few out-of-town guests also staying at the hotel. The air was filled with polite conversation and cautious optimism, a flicker of hope that the day would unfold peacefully. What he didn't expect, however, was that he would be effectively sequestered for the remainder of the day, politely sidelined under the guise of inclusion, with every move choreographed to keep him visible but insignificant. His son kept him nearby, bringing him along for the groom's party festivities, which were held in a second-floor hotel meeting room. Surrounded by groomsmen nearly 40 years his junior, John felt awkward, misplaced. A ceremonial figure presents more out of social necessity than familial connection. John smiled. He listened. He even helped tie a few ties. But deep down, he felt like a relic, not a participant. John had driven 9 hours from his home in a southern retirement community to be part of what he hoped would be a meaningful and inclusive experience. He had arranged to meet his youngest daughter that morning to help with a few personal matters. He had requested assistance days earlier, yet when he texted her, and then his other daughter, silence was all that followed, not even a brief acknowledgement. The sting of their absence grew heavier with each hour, punctuating the day meant for family and joy with a quiet ache of exclusion. As the afternoon unfolded, John was told, not asked, to ride with the wedding party aboard the limo bus to the venue. He politely declined at first, preferring to drive his own vehicle, which held not only a suit and medication, but also the bride and groom's gift card. A large, personalized item he had carefully packed. Still, his son gently but insistently steered him into compliance, framing it as easier this way. In truth, it was a day marked not by choices but by quiet commands. From where to be, to what time to arrive, to how long to stay in each place. John was gently guided into the margins, camouflaged as participation. Several weeks prior, John had received a long, unexpected phone call from Angela, his ex-wife. What began as a routine conversation quickly turned into a verbal ambush. For 45 uninterrupted minutes, Angela recited a list of grievances, allegedly collected from their 3 children, detailing how they felt John had shown little interest in their lives, failed to acknowledge milestones, and hadn't earned a seat of honor at the wedding. John sat in silence, absorbing the blows, but something deeper stirred beneath her words. These weren't quotes from the children. They were interpretations, curated narratives framed by Angela herself, who had long acted as a family's emotional gatekeeper, filtering affection, access, and forgiveness through her own lens. John recognized the manipulation immediately. A parent can only celebrate what they are invited to witness. Living states away, John relied on communication to remain engaged, but when that communication was filtered or cut off, he had no pathway in. His gestures of interest were often ignored, his invitations declined, and his questions redirected. Yet Angela weaponized the results of that emotional blockade against him. This exchange revealed 2 classic narcissistic tactics. 1. Narrative control. Angela framed herself as a con with the children's thoughts, blocking direct dialogue and filtering messages through her own agenda. 2. Pain as power. She didn't call to encourage reconciliation. She called to deliver discomfort, and to remind John of the power she still wielded. The ceremony itself was held in a charming outdoor garden, nestled under the late afternoon sun. A female friend of the groom officiated, having received a mail-order ordination, a common gesture in their social circle. John's son proudly announced that he too was now ordained and had recently officiated another couple ceremony. Yet this was news to John. Another small but significant life milestone kept from him, then later used as quiet evidence of his detachment. After the vows, guests were guided to an enclosed pavilion for the reception. The long, high ceiling room was flanked with elegant garage-style glass doors and arranged with 5 rows of carefully assigned tables. As guests settled in, the wedding party prepared for their grand entrance. When it came time to introduce the groom's parents, John stood beside Angela at the side entrance, ready to walk in together. But as soon as their names were announced, Angela surged forward with almost comic speed, leaving John to trail behind, alone and under the scrutiny of dozens of eyes. It was not just awkward, it was designed to be. Inside, the seating arrangement spoke volumes. John, expecting to sit near his son, was instead guided to the last table in the room. Positioned at the rear against a 3rd garage door, he was seated with distant relatives and a few of his own friends. His immediate family, Children, ex-wife, and grandchildren were positioned at a separate table, at least one full row away, with 2 tables acting as a moat between them. As the reception unfolded, John's table remained untouched by the bride and groom. They circulated graciously among guests, but skipped past him and his party entirely. Later, John watched his cousin make 2 unsuccessful attempts to say goodbye to the newlyweds. Hoping to bridge the moment, John stepped in to guide her over, offering to assist. As he approached his son and spoke, he was met with a sharp, dismissive reply. "I got this, Dad." The statement wasn't logistical, it was symbolic. It wasn't about taking charge. It was about pushing away. John's only intention was to support a gesture between extended family and a groom who barely knew their names. But Angela's years of emotional gatekeeping, cutting off access, dismissing invitations, and orchestrating loyalty, had laid the foundation for this moment. Angela's conduct, both leading up to and during the wedding, reveals multiple hallmarks of covert narcissistic abuse and alienation. Emotional triangulation. She portrayed herself as a children's mouthpiece, monopolizing their emotions and restricting direct conversation. Public image curation. Her gestures of civility masked a long orchestrated effort to keep John marginalized while appearing collaborative. Social sabotage. The seating assignment, lack of acknowledgement, and omission from key moments were not accidental. They were strategic. Generational isolation. Years of limited access to paternal relatives culminated in John, the groom's father, being rendered emotionally irrelevant on the most important day of his son's life. The wedding should have been a celebration of growth, unity, and family legacy. Instead, for John, it became a meticulously staged reminder of how far removed he had become, not by choice, but by design. He returned to his hotel that night, emotionally exhausted, packed quietly, left the next morning, and began his long drive south. Alone, uninvited to any post-wedding brunch. No grandchild hugs goodbye, just silence. Angela had outmaneuvered him once again, not with cruelty, but with choreography. A masterclass in exclusion by manipulation. A final flourish of a sleight of mind.